Welcome to the Non-Human and AI Identity podcast. By humans, for humans, no AI-generated content. Hi, I'm Lalit Choda, founder of the Non-Human Identity Management Group. On this brand new podcast show, I'll be hosting the leading voices shaping the future of non-human and agentic AI identity. Welcome to our Non-Human and AI Identity podcast. I'm really excited to have Jeff Rich, Executive Director at ISDA, Identity Defined Security Alliance, join me for this episode. Jeff, why don't you just give the audience a brief intro and maybe share something interesting people may not know about you?
Sure, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Lal. I'm looking forward to this. I hear you're a tough interviewer, so let's see how things go. My name's Jeff Rich, as you said. I've been with the Identity Defined Security Alliance, leading this for a bit over 3 years. The IDSA itself is about 6 or 7 years old. So there was someone who founded it. I came in after. We cover really topics that raise the level of identity security or identity security awareness. And it's around the globe. We have members in Australia and India, Israel, Brazil, Taiwan, the US, Canada. So briefly, that's what's going on with IDSA. As far as myself, to your question, I've been in the security and related identity industry for 5 decades.
Wow.
So they haven't kicked me out yet, although I think some people have tried. I started the security programs at places like Dell Computers, Rackspace Hosting, and Cloud, CheckFree, which is a online payment and bill presentment system. A few startups. I was a director at a research institute at University of Texas, San Antonio. So I've done a number of different things. I like building things. I like breaking things because then you get to build them again better. And that's pretty much me. I think one thing that people may not know about me is I used to be a distance runner. I used to run about 80 miles a week. I don't do that anymore, only because there's some physical reasons why I don't. I still walk every day on a treadmill. That's not that interesting, but I think we may find a way to tie it in later on.
Yeah, let's try to. Maybe you can encourage me to do a bit more exercise through the discussion as well. All right, look, before we get into the main discussion, we're going to start with Mr. NHI's Human Identity in the Hot Seat quiz, where I'm going to fire 10 machine speed, thought-provoking questions on identity management and security. So, Jeff, are you ready?
I was born ready.
Cool. All right. Are orgs taking NHI risks seriously enough?
No. Now, if you want a quick expounding on that, the reason I think they're not taking it seriously enough is I don't think enough organizations are even aware of what's going on with NHI in their organizations. As a result, they cannot take them seriously enough. And I think that's the biggest issue right now.
Okay. And are you a fan of vibe coding?
I am. Just like I'm a fan of skateboards. And the reason I use that analogy is skateboards can be very effective to get you from point A to point B. However, if you want to carry something expensive, fragile, or large, skateboarding is probably not the best method to use. And I think I take the same approach with vibe coding. There are some things that make sense. The biggest issue I see with vibe coding is the lack of guardrails in many cases. So things where there's high value, importance, or availability, I would question whether vibe coding alone is enough for you.
Okay, I must say that's probably one of the best answers I've heard to this question. So great insights and analogy there. Okay, this one you might find interesting. Do you think IAM for AI is more important than AI for IAM?
I think that IAM for AI is more important because there's a level of control you need over AI, similar to what I said in my previous answer. As far as AI for IAM, AI is simply another tool. I mean, it's a rather advanced one now, but it's simply another tool. Just like with every other vertical in your toolbox, AI should be used appropriately, and I think it makes sense. But we really need IAM for AI, and I don't think it exists very much.
Great. And do you think regulators are moving fast enough to keep up with agentic AI?
I think you could have stopped that question halfway through, and my answer would be no. I've never seen regulators move quickly enough for any technology in my lifetime, which is not real short. So no, I don't think so.
Okay. And do you think do you think hackers will be the biggest winners from AI?
Um, in the long run, I don't think they will be. They're certainly in the mix. The reason I don't think they will be is just like any tool or weapon, eventually, there's an arms race that always goes on, and the bad guys will win on a given day, and the good guys will win on another given day. But I think the reason that the hackers won't necessarily win is that they tend to have very limited goals, whether it's financial, political. There's a couple areas, but they're rather specific. Whereas business, corporations, and the good guys in general, and I'm just going to include all that, have broader goals, and as a result, have I think better methodologies and better outcomes. So I don't think the hackers will win, but I don't think they're going to go away.
Do you personally use AI agents?
Yes, I do in moderation. I don't use them to create content. I don't use them to create programs that I'm going to run in production. But I do use them to give me a foundation. If I'm beginning some research, I'll sometimes use agents to search what might be out there. Even then, I have to filter through it, but it gives me a good place to start.
Okay, great. And do you think organizations are putting time to market ahead of security controls for AI agents?
Absolutely. AI is the sexy thing right now, and that's going to happen. And as I said earlier, I've been doing this for 5 decades, and I could take a quote out of any one of those decades where a CISO or a CISO equivalent will say, the company isn't listening to me enough. They're running too fast. They aren't putting the right controls in, and I don't have enough budget. Yeah, I see you're smiling. Give me a decade, and that statement was made by a security professional every single time. So I'm not saying it's wrong because business is in business to conduct business. However, just like with any other tool, some of them unfortunately are feeling the pain of what happens when you go in without the right controls, without being considerate of what needs to happen from a security perspective. And that will balance. I'd say give it another year or two, and I think you're going to start seeing more and more balancing of security and the use of new AI tools.
Right, I do agree as well. Okay, do you think static long-lived credentials will still be here in 5 years?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I've been hearing passwords are dead for about 35 years. So I know that now they're on critical life support. I admit that they are the beginning of the end. We are certainly into that, but I don't believe we will be completely gone in 5 years yet.
Cool. And do you think PAM is going to change dramatically with the introduction of agentic AI agents?
It shouldn't, but I think it will. And the reason I think it will is right now, many organizations either ignore PAM for agentic identities, or they just treat them the same as the carbon-based identities. And I think as this goes on more and more, organizations will start realizing there has to be a difference, especially if it's an ephemeral identity or it's short-lived in a different way, that it has to be treated differently. Standing privilege no longer really works with agentic. I've actually encountered one organization that said we use one identity for all of our agentic activities.
Wow.
And we had a short discussion.
Yeah, I'm sure you put them straight. Okay, and finally, should agentic AI identities be treated separately to standard non-human identities?
I think I just gave that answer. That the reason I think it's different is their presence, their longevity, and the fact that there is no ethics-based rationale behind any activity that an agentic identity takes versus a human. And I'm going to assume humans have some level of ethics that they follow, whatever they are.
Great. Look, I really enjoyed your insights there, Jeff. Clearly, 5 decades of experience, definitely shining through with some of your sort of insights there. And look, I think this is a good segue for our main topic today. Today, we're going to talk about finding the NHI blind spots. As we've just touched on, look, clearly with the arms race of deploying AI agents and agentic systems, we're kind of like realizing that maybe our identity frameworks and our systems aren't really built for, the world that exists today, right? And clearly we're going to see more and more blind spots around non-human identities and AI agents. So clearly, with your years of experience and your leadership at ISDA, we definitely want to understand, what's missing, where maybe our traditional IAM systems fall short, and maybe where we need to go from a framework, standards, and tooling perspective, to deal with kind of the new age of non-human identities and an AI era. Now, before we get into that big topic, look, you've got a huge event that you and your team are running right on April the 14th. Do you want to just share with the audience what that is? And clearly, highly recommend all of our listeners to be attending that event.
Thank you, and I'd be happy to. In fact, you are a big part of that event, and I'm going to get to that in just a couple of seconds. This is the 6th annual Identity Management Day. It has grown into a 21-hour event.
Wow.
We start in the morning of April 14th in Melbourne, Australia. And that is actually a hybrid event where they have an in-person event that we also stream. And then we move from there to and there's different speakers and activities. We move from there to coming out of Copenhagen, Denmark. And by the way, Identity XP is our co-chair in Melbourne. And then coming out of Copenhagen, Omada Security is running the EMEA region of that event. And you are one of our keynote speakers there, Lily. And I thank you very much for giving us the time for that. We are looking forward to that. We have some other great speakers as well. I'm not going to go through the entire list. And then after the EMEA region, we move to the Americas. And we end up finishing at around 4 p.m. Eastern time in the Americas. And in the Americas, we have sponsors, we have exhibit booths, we have gamification, there's prizes. So there's great sessions, fantastic learning. If you want to stay up 21 hours, join me because I will be attempting to do that again. Although one of these years, I'm just not going to be able to pull that off. The problem is I'm doing the Americas, so I have to be awake for that one. But in any case, if you cannot attend all or possibly can't attend any of those on the 14th, starting if you're in EMEA or the Americas, it actually starts in the evening of the 13th. We record every session. You'll be able to still register for free and look at any one of the sessions recorded. And the way you can register is just go to identitymanagementday.org or our website, which is idsalliance.org, and you'll see that pop right up there. Free registration. We really look forward to seeing you there. In the past, we've had over 70 countries participating. Let's add to that. Let's really grow this. And Lau, thanks again for your contributions for what we're going to be doing then.
Yeah, look, well, it's when I first heard about this event only a few months ago, 21 hours, kind of truly impressive to be doing that around the globe. And yes, you've got a great lineup of speakers. And thanks for asking me to talk a little bit about the NHI topic and a panel session as well. So really looking forward to the day. And again, can't urge enough, people should definitely attend that. You're going to get something out of the event, either during the day or post-event. So good luck, Jeff, with your team to hosting this sort of phenomenal event. And I'm sure one day, maybe with agents, you'll go to a 24-hour kind of window versus 21 hours.
Oh, so you're going to push the last 3 hours out of us. We may give that a try. As right now we're calling it 21 hours of identity goodness. I'd be happy to change that to 24, as long as I get someone else to help me.
Yeah, we just get a few agents to join the team.
Yes.
Right. All right. So look, our topic today is NHI blind spots. Like, why don't you maybe just share kind of your initial thoughts, right? When we talk about blind spots when it comes to non-human identities, what do you see that's kind of out there at the moment within organizations in terms of those major blind spots?
Well, thanks again. So I've in the past done some consulting, and there's always two questions I ask when I would start a consulting gig. The first one was, when did it happen? And if you're smiling, if you've done consulting, you realize that question is important, because even if they didn't tell you before, there's a reason they want a security consultant in. And it's not because they think, let's just do things better. It's usually because something happened that triggered it, whether it was an audit or a disruption or a data breach, whatever it was. So we get that out of the way. And then the next question I ask is one that I know the answer to, but I ask it anyways. And I say, so can you give me a list of all your most valuable digital assets and how they're accessed and who accesses them? Of course, once again, if they could answer that completely, they wouldn't need me as a security consultant, because once you get a good view of what's going on, you know what the individuals running the business and operating the business know what it takes to protect all of that appropriately. Same thing with NHI. The difference is we run the risk of it being even more invisible, because there may be one section, whether it's, and I'm not going to pick on anyone. Everyone usually picks on marketing and sales as doing the evil, non-secure things in a company. And I'm not going to say that. Any organization, I'd say it's research that ends up engaging an outside service of some sort. It's going to very likely have AI involved. There's going to be NHIs, because every instance of AI requires a non-human identity in order for it to work. So within each one of those, even if it's as simple, even if people are simply using something like a generative AI and prompting something as simple as, where can I go find lunch? That's happening in their environment. So there's non-human identities running there, and people don't know that they're there. So that is, I think, the biggest blind spot. And even when they think they know what they are and where they are, they really don't know what they can access. And those blind spots, I think when you transfer the general methodology I talked about to non-human identities, I really think it gives us a situation where in many organizations, they don't know what's out there. They don't know what it can do. They think AI is relatively simple and safe. And this is a recipe for potential disaster.
Yeah, look, we'll definitely talk about the AI piece in a minute. I think to your point, which made me smile was, yes, like the talk I'm going to give, a practitioner's guide to managing NHI risk. I guess just a bit of a sneak preview of one of the topics at your event. I will actually be talking about an incident that occurred and was the start of a huge NHI program at a huge financial organization. So yes, I do align that many of these discussions around blind spots start after an incident, and that becomes the enlightening moment for the organization, the CISO, the security head, to realize, wow, this is a huge problem. Now, look, why do you think we've ended up with huge blind spots around the sort of NHI space? Is that mainly because organizations have focused on kind of human and still struggling to deal with things like human access control and or are there other reasons why kind of we've ended up with these big blind spots around NHIs?
I think the two you mentioned are probably the most foundational. Privilege access management is something that organizations, even if you exclude NHI, still don't have their arms around in many cases. Standing privilege ends up being easy, just because there's the least amount of friction in it in getting things done that you desire to get done. But not everyone looks into what's the collateral damage, what are the after effects, what's downstream from doing all that standing privilege. And when an organization manages access, especially privileged access, in that manner, and then starts introducing NHIs, a lot of times they'll say, well, we'll treat it the same way, so that this non-human identity should be able to do these things within our HR system. But what they may not realize is, especially if there's AI behind it, and I'm sorry, I know you want to talk about AI later, but to me, it's difficult to really talk about NHIs without getting into what they're usually used for. A developed AI system, I was going to say well-developed, but I realized I shouldn't, is going to say, give me all the resources available to me so I can come up with what the best result is going to be. That is the intent of most AI systems. So if there's any access, whether it's the internal network or to the internet, that allows any sort of program to say, well, let me see what else there is about this, all of a sudden you now have data feeding your system that you weren't using when people were doing this manually, or they wrote a program to do it because they could see each step of what the program did. And now when you get the results, when you trust them, you don't even know necessarily what went into it. So in the mix, now there are many blind spots that many organizations are still blind to because it's all under the covers and buried. And you have organizations that are feel they can let some engineers go because AI should be able to do their function. Actually, I don't see as much of that as you hear news reports, but it is still happening. The level of expertise that's being applied to developing systems, putting them in place, and operating them has diminished regardless. And as a result, no one really knows. It used to be that I had one of the cars I had was a 1965 Mustang. I told you I'm old. All right. I could tell if that car was running well or not just by starting it up and sometimes just feeling it or listening to it. I really can't do that with a car now. I need a computer to plug in to see if a car is running well or not. I think the same sort of thing happened in our systems, in that there are very few people that can just put their hands on it and say, is this running correctly or not? And as a result, when they become a bit more autonomous, that problem compounds itself.
Yeah, look, some great insights there. And I think part of that analogy maybe also is around sort of more and more use of like vibe coding, where you kind of lose control of what's being done behind the covers. Has the code been, written safely? Has it got the right guardrails? I've been playing myself with a bit of vibe coding and talked about this before, but I'm shocked with the number of hard-coded static credentials. It recommends that you should use long-lived credentials. So again, these AI is definitely compounding the problem and creating probably even more bigger blind spots than organizations had already. Let's maybe sort of continue this discussion a little bit more. And then obviously, with your vast experience, and obviously you deal with like lots of organizations, sort of thought leaders kind of in your role at ISDA, what are some of your kind of practitioners, telling you about how they're struggling to deal with kind of the NHI challenge and, the blind spot issue? What's making the problem really hard for them to kind of understand and manage and control?
There are a few big challenges. One thing that IDSA does, we create an annual research paper on the state of digital identity. I'm not going to get deep into that, and if anyone wants, you can download that for free from our website, idsalliance.org. But one change that happened between since 2024 and 2025, the 2026 report will be coming out in September, by the way, was that in 24, we saw, and we can, in crosstabs, we can see which level of person in the organization is giving which sort of answers. CISOs thought that AI was something we really needed to get into. There were some control thoughts, but they were really pro AI and resulting NHIs and having more NHIs engage because they thought we could have more granular control, especially from a security perspective. And I do believe that can happen. And CEOs in 2024 were hesitant. And do I really want to go with AI? Is that a risk I want to take? In 2025, that completely flipped on its head. CEOs were now 80% or better in favor of AI should be doing almost everything, should be involved in almost everything we do. And CISOs were screaming in their responses saying, no, stop, slow down. We're going too fast in this and we don't have the right guardrails and controls in place. I think that's an interesting artifact on this very topic, because what security professionals and identity professionals are seem to be struggling with the most is twofold. One, knowing how systems with NHIs actually work, because they may have been created and implemented without any of their input or review, more likely than maybe in the past. So there's problem number one. If you don't know what's going on there, you're not going to be able to protect it and control it effectively. Number two is the exact problem you mentioned in vibe coding. Vibe coding, by the way, can be fun and enjoyable. Of course, playing poker can be fun too, but that's not necessarily what you always do at work. Yeah. But as that's done, you can see a lot of long-lived credentials hard-coded inside. And it took us decades to get developers to take the hard-coded credentials out of traditional programs, and now they're finding their way right back into the vibe coding programs and even some off-the-shelf AI SaaS services as well. So with that in place, now you have the problem of everything that you run can access everything because that's the way to reduce the friction. The way to make sure it runs, just give it access to everything, and it's long lived. Uh, Obviously, a huge vulnerability for the bad guys to just find one of those and compromise it. And since it's in one of those blind spots we're talking about, you have a much lower chance of uh, of identifying that and preventing it because there are so many activities going on with those hard-coded credentials that you can't even manage. So one more in that mix, looks like just one more, no big deal to you. So I think what I'm hearing is those are the two biggest challenges identity and security professionals are faced with, knowing what's going on and then being able to identify when an NHI is being used properly or improperly.
Yeah, look, that's kind of got me thinking a little bit. So a great answer, but like, would we like summarize the story so far as look, many people know about some of the issues and risks with NHIs, static, long-lived, don't know what they are, lack of ownership, lack of rotation, the breadth of access. But now, with kind of the AI agents, agentic world, kind of a lot of those risks and issues are now being compounded, given the breadth of what an agent could do now. NHIs before, because they were your crown jewels for your key business processes, they were highly privileged, but now for the agentic AI systems to work, organizations are just saying, well, let's just give them access to everything now, or a broader set of access, right? You take kind of the incident that was reported, right, at McKinsey's AI infrastructure, right, just recently, right? It's quite shocking the breadth of access that their AI agent had. So clearly, the issues are going to now start getting bigger, be more compounded, due to just having so many more of these NHIs with potentially, you know, much higher privileges. Is that kind of, would you kind of summarize as well in terms of your thoughts on where kind of things are currently heading with kind of the
I
AI
I
world?
I think so. I'm not the harbinger of doom. I have seen some good implementations of NHI and AI.
Hmm.
They're fewer than I would like to see, but there are some good ones out there. But I think, yeah, your summary pretty much gets there. And unfortunately, they find out when the breach happens.
Let's I want to also look get your thoughts a little bit more on sort of what you're hearing from practitioners. Look, there's obviously a lot of noise, hype around the industry, around kind of autonomous agentic AI, and you know people potentially being deploying. Every organization's deploying agents. I kind of was speaking to a CISO last week on the podcast, and his view was, very few organizations have really deployed agents into production. They're playing with it, they're trying it, they're clearly concerned about kind of governance and of the agents and, what they can then potentially do given their autonomous nature. Kind of what are you hearing kind of, you know, from the industry and people you're talking to? Where is kind of the maturity of kind of AI agents, agentic AI deployments? Are most organizations you're speaking to deploy them already in production or thinking about it and trialing it? Kind of where is the maturity at the moment?
Um, with the organizations I've been having discussion with, I would describe that it's in flight. Some of them have begun some implementations. Some have, there's one or two that have some mature implementations of it. And the reason that there's a mature implementation is they still recognize that we're nowhere near done and there's a lot more we need to do, but we've taken a lot of good steps already. In the same way that, we've talked about, I've been doing this for a long time, but I don't know everything. I don't pretend to know everything. And there's a whole lot more I need to know. But I think some of the organizations that they're in flight they want to plan it, they want to implement it, but they don't know how cold the water is and they're afraid to put their toe in. That could be a good thing. That being said, ignoring this means you're going to get run over by it. So we are at the point where anyone that feels, oh, I'm going to lose my job to AI, if you feel that, it's correct. But no one needs to lose their job to AI because it's simply a new tool. It's no different than people thinking they would have lost their jobs when assembly lines became automated or when computers first showed up, 40, 50 years ago in general. It is simply a new tool. And I think too many people are still ignorant of what that means and don't even know what a non-human identity is. They just think, oh yeah, that's no different than the service account I gave to our HR program. And I've been doing that for 10 years. What's the big deal? They don't really even know what the difference is. So I think there's an education that needs to happen. You and I know, participate in that. You more so. I believe and thank you for that. And as a result, the more, especially executives, are educated on the proper use of NHIs and AI, I think the more you're going to see people doing it correctly. We will stumble and fall and slip down slippery slopes and into holes between now and then. But I do believe we're going to get there. I just think the implementations I'm seeing so far, the ones that are in flight, they're a bit more cautious, only because of the press around every breach that occurs and the story they hear behind it, like McKinsey, for instance.
Okay, look, if we then start deep diving into the sort of agentic AI world, maybe share your thoughts on what are the big security implications and challenges like these autonomous agents are going to bring, and maybe talk then a little bit more about kind of what are some of the new blind spots that are going to be created, right, with the autonomous kind of agent, digital workforce that's clearly coming very fast.
So I think, in a word, guardrails. That's my biggest concern. If without having guardrails, all bets are off. So, and I think you know that very well, because before the robots take over, which this is the next step in that progression, we need to make sure that we know two things: what can they do, and what can they access. And with everything we have going on, I think, and we mentioned IAM briefly, I think access management is one of our biggest blind spots. Because when you have an autonomous agent running, it's very likely designed to say, get access to all the information you can in order to contribute to the most educated result. I'll just call it that. I can't come up with a good term for it because good isn't the right answer for that. But for the most educated result. And in the same way, I know there have been some breaches of this happened in a very large company where the AI agent was run to do something simple within HR, but it had access to the internet. So it ended up finding all of the Facebook and Instagram feeds for everyone in the organization and fed that into its decisions and started talking about hobbies, sexual habits, food of all of the employees, which really, well, let's just call it inappropriate. And that's because there weren't guardrails put in place to say not only what can it do, but also more importantly, what can it access. And I think I may be repeating the same thing over and over again, but without that education, we will continue to have those problems and they will burn us until enough of us learn that we need to treat autonomous agents as if they were 4-year-olds that could make decisions, but don't necessarily know what the consequences are.
Yeah, look, you talk about guardrails, and you talk about kind of, what access does it have, what can it do? And I think that's, a good answer, but I think it's a real simplification when it comes to this topic, which you could spend hours and hours and hours talking about, just guardrails on their own. But if we were to sort of take that discussion a little bit forward and say, well, we look at the kind of the tooling landscape, our current IM, PAM, IGA stack that we have. Look, a couple of years ago, we were talking about this stack, which is mainly designed for human access, couldn't support the NHI use case. And now, kind of obviously, we're seeing a huge growth in the kind of NHI sort of suite of products. Obviously, some existing providers are now providing those capabilities, and to me, it feels like we're kind of now where we were 2 or 3 years ago with NHIs, where nothing really existed to support them. And I think we're now in that same place when it comes to dealing with kind of the agentic AI autonomous. Well, in your view, kind of where do you think we are now? What are the big gaps that we have from a tooling kind of framework standard standpoint that we need to now deal with and invest in, and hope sort of vendors in the market can help build capabilities to start supporting, and implementing some of those kind of guardrails that you've just talked about.
So I think we are in the early stages of what a good frameworks that are going to work. There's going to be more than one. I mentioned that because at IDSA we have a working group, Machine and Agentic Identity Working Group, and they have created their outline and skeleton for a framework for machine and agentic identities. It won't be the final answer. It won't be the only framework, but it is going to be one that's out there. And I think what you're going to see actually with some of our members that are offering NHI management tools, what you're seeing is a simplification. And I know you used that word earlier, for the consuming organizations, because there can no longer be the assumption that every organization is going to know everything about everything that happens in the organization, because you and we can't keep up with anything that an agentic AI system is going to do when it comes to gathering information and creating a result. I'm not that good. With all due respect, I don't think you're that good. At the very least, you're not that fast. Maybe that good, but you're not that fast. So speed and scale, especially when we start talking about quantum, which is not necessarily in scope of the discussion here, but that's going to get us there. And qubits are going to take the NHI and autonomous agent discussion and put it to a scale that most people don't even understand right now. So once we get there, I think you're going to see organizations that offer tools and some services that say, here's how you can get some control over it. I know a few of our members are already offering things that claim that. And I think that's where we're going to have to be. I think it's going to be, you can't stay with simply one vendor. You're going to have to say, here's what I could do with one thing. Here's how the autonomous agents are going to run either from another vendor or how we're going to create them. Here's yet another one that we're going to use to look at monitoring it, putting the right guardrails in either for access controls or capabilities, and reporting on it to have the equivalent of a GRC for autonomous agents. We'll see what happens with that. So I think the tooling is going to be there for that. As far as creating the applications, I'm looking forward to the next advancement that says I'm going to have an AI-based system that's going to create my autonomous agents and applications for me, at least as a foundation that I'm going to say now needs to be reviewed, needs to have standards, needs to have a framework, and even if the framework's only for your environment. You can't go into this blind. You can't say AI is going to save me money, so therefore I can eliminate people and just have everything go into AI. That's very foolish. But the tools are starting to show up. I think in the timeline you talked about, give us another year or two. I think, given the right budget, many organizations can say, I'm going to do this correctly, and here's the tools I'm going to use to do it.
I mean, look, I think looking at the last few years, I think we saw so many players come into the NHI space. It was, I think, it became quite a saturated market, maybe a confusing story of what do you do. I just think now if you're kind of someone looking at how does kind of the industry help you, your organization, tackle kind of this thing you just cannot ignore, right, around agentic AI. Like, how does like a CISO or a security head think about, you know, what do they do from a capability standpoint now? How do they go out into the industry and figure out, what should they potentially buy? What should they build? Should they wait, see how things morph, or do you think they've got to take action now and, to use some of the capabilities that are already out there to at least do some of the basics around inventory, find out what's, out there, who's creating agents, is it out of control? Like, what would be your advice, in terms of, if a CISO or a security head says, look, I need to, get going, where do I start with managing the agent from a kind of tooling process standpoint? Any insights, thoughts from your end?
We have one member who asked that exact question almost verbatim. It's a consuming organization, not an identity vendor. Obviously, I think we'd be surprised if an identity vendor asked that question. And I'm actually going to be meeting with them again to follow up because the discussion focused around privileged access management, or PAM, and AI. That's really the balancing act they're trying to make. And their question was, what tool can I get to fix that? And the reason we're going to be meeting again is my first answer. Once again, I don't have all the answers, but my first answer was there is no one tool that's going to do that. And if you find one that you think does, then whoever's selling it to you probably needs a new boat, because that tool there really doesn't exist yet. For any CISO that's saying, what can I do to solve this? Don't look for what the market offers only. There may be some good tools out there. That being said, what I do recommend is get out in the community. Find a working group, whether it's with IDSA or not. That makes no difference. Work with your peers. Go to a security organization, some of which can do better than others, whether it's ISSA or IC Squared or OWASP, and there's others. I'm not going to just list other organizations. Get involved. Go to some conferences, not for the swag, not for the trip, but to really get into talking to the people that are working on solving this problem. A few weeks ago, I attended the Deepfake Summit, the first Deepfake Summit. And I think there's another one coming up in September to follow on. And the good news is there were some really bright people, and there were some vendors, but there were really some bright people in there that said, here's a problem we have. Now, deepfake is a limited set of agentic AI, or AI rather, and NHI that we need to deal with. It's purporting to be a person. And the question is, how can you tell if it is or not? I think most of us have heard of the story of the $2 million transfer that occurred from a deepfake CEO to someone in the Treasury. That won't be the last one of those, by the way, I believe. So at the Deepfake Summit, what I really appreciated hearing was most people said, we don't know yet. And when a smart person says, I don't know yet, then you're hearing that they are smart, and they're telling you that we're still early stage in this, and which is why there's going to be a follow-on conference. So I can't recommend enough. Get engaged in your community. Find who your community is, whether it's online or in person, and go find the answers. There are some good solutions out there, but I don't think any are mature enough yet.
Okay, great. Insights and recommendations there. Look, I think we're now coming to closing this podcast. Again, a little bit related to what you just said, but look, if on top of kind of that advice you just gave, like, what would you, share with the audience, right, in terms of, the kind of NHI blind spots we talked about, what would be one of the first things you would ask them to focus on and prioritize in the next quarter, right, to start tackling this huge monster that most likely exists within their organization? They probably have very little controls around it. What would be that key piece of advice you'd give them to do?
So for any CISO that would ask, how do I start solving this? I would offer two things and make them simple. I think you picked up from me. I like to keep the answer simple Because when you make them complex, even though they're accurate, some people stare at it and don't know where to start. Number one, take every department head to lunch. Now, in a very large organization, that may be difficult, but the reason I say that is don't push security on them. Don't tell them how important it is. Don't say, here's the latest firewall we have, whatever. Don't do that. Listen to what they're doing, what they're working on. What do they think they're going to be doing in 6 months or a year? And just listen, because your job is to be able to support and control that appropriately. That's what you're there, or at least to advise it. And until you know what it is, you can't do your job. So find that out, take them to lunch, and a couple days after lunch, send them a note or give them a call and say, I heard what you said. Here's the 5 priorities you have this year. Here's what I want to be able to do to support each one of those. That allows you to engage with them and let them know you're not the guy or person that's going to say no to whatever they want to do. You're there to help them get it done. Number one. So you need to know what's happening. And that allows you to see what's already happened. That's how you can start eliminating some of those blind spots. You meet with them or some of their staff and they say, well, here's the things we're doing and here's what we're running and it's working great for us. Then listen to that. Don't contest it yet. And then you may want to come up with, I'm glad it's working great. Here's some controls that might make sense as well. All right, so there's number one. Number two, I'll repeat what I said a few minutes ago. Go get out in the community. Go talk to your peers. Talk to organizations that think they're doing it well. Find out everything you can because it's early stage. This is your opportunity to get in on the ground floor of this and say, I was one of the early, whether you want to say it or not, I was one of the early people that figured out how can we identify what's going on with NHI and how can we start controlling it appropriately without going overboard and spending a whole bunch of money. And you're only going to be able to do that when you talk to the other people that are trying to answer the same question because no one has this answer yet. I would offer if the answer were truly there, you'd need a new podcast.
Yeah, and Mr. NHI probably wouldn't need to exist anymore. Look, I really enjoyed
you. Here for a while, Al.
Yeah, look, I really enjoyed your guidance there, especially point one. I think, especially with all the shadow IT that's probably going on across, the organizations, with, people in the business, non-technical people using some of the tooling, Claude Cowork and many other kind of AI tools are out there. Even my daughter's playing with it now, and I'm quite impressed with what she's building. I think talking, understanding what people are doing, because I've spoken to another organization. They said, "Oh, we think we've got 4,000 agents already in the within the organization, but we don't know what they are, what they're doing, right?" So great bit of advice, like talking to the business and find out what they're doing, what's their use case, and have they already started building some of this stuff without your knowledge before you can even, as you said, put any controls and guardrails and start to work with them, as a collective to kind of put some governance around, clearly what's an unstoppable world, right? Pretty scary what's going on out there. And no one knows the answers, which is the biggest challenge. All right, look, really enjoyed the chat, Jeff. Again, you've shown throughout this discussion huge amounts of insight, experience, kind of maturity. So I really loved things. I learned a lot myself from what you shared, and the fact that you can summarize things in really simple ways with some great analogies along the way. I'll still remember the skateboarding analogy. I'll have to use that myself when I talk to others in the future. Is there anything else you'd like to maybe finally share in terms of closing thoughts again, or maybe just remind people how they can get to know about the event and your organization? Anything else you want to share in closing?
Certainly. I want to start off by thanking you. Thank you not only for having me on today, but for doing this podcast. This is information that needs to be shared, and more people need to see it. I'm going to do all I can to support that. And I'm going to recommend get involved. One way to get involved, that conference I talked about, Identity Management Day, we use a platform that allows people to network with each other in there. There's a great opportunity to start creating hey, what are you doing with this? Can we get together after to maybe have a discussion? Or if you're local, let's go have a coffee. So continue that. When you want to either join live or recordings for Identity Management Day. You can do it at either identitymanagementday.org or from our website, idsalliance.org. Also encourage you, if you want, join us, work with some of your peers in the Alliance for a nonprofit. So love to have you on board. And listen to podcasts, get more information. There isn't enough information out there. Not all of it's the right information for you, but go find some, filter it out, and you'll be able to make some good decisions.
All right, great closing thoughts, Jeff. And I definitely would highly recommend sort of the networking opportunities with Jeff's, sort of not-for-profit organization and many others out there in the industry, including our NHI group. And just on closing on that, please subscribe to our Non-Human Identity Management podcast and all the various channels. Also visit nhimg.org, where we have over 2,000 articles all about non-human identities and agentic AI. And also, if you want to get upskilled on how to tackle the NHI challenge, go and visit NHItraining.org, where we've got the most comprehensive training course on NHIs and AI agents. Right, with that, I'd say thanks very much, Jeff. It was a real pleasure to have you on the show, and thank you for your insights.
Thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day.
Cheers.